So, well, I would like to welcome you all to the executive speaker night for tonight. And our host, who is the CEO and executive chairman of the IMA Financial Group, Robert Cohen, is going to be our guest tonight. And how I arrived at Robert is I was looking at the companies that are doing so well in the face of the pandemic, largely to find out if there are lessons for everybody from how they functioned, what had actually happened to them leading to the pandemic, how they functioned during the pandemic, and also what their future plans are. So at least we can have a sense of what they went through and how they managed to go through that situation. So that's how I ended up inviting Robert Cohen, who is the chairman and chief executive officer of the IMA Financial Group, because I noticed they did a tremendous job, which we are going to uncover as we go along. And we are going to learn more about Robert as the event unfolds. So before we waste any more time, let me just welcome Robert. Robert, welcome to the Executive Speaker Night Series.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and for all of you listening, that's truly what I hope that occurs tonight, is more of a conversation and less of me talking. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to jump right in.
Excellent. So Robert, give us a setup. What were the conditions and how was your company doing leading up to the environment, up to the pandemic?
Yeah,
and
no, I mean,
how did that, and how did your company fare?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost hard at this point to remember what was going on 15, 16 months ago, but when you do and you stop and you pause, our industry was no different than most of where the economy was. Things were chugging along nicely. Our industry was doing well, even in light of some challenges. The industry was in a hard market, which means the prices were firming, basically because of the natural disasters that occurred in the country, the jury verdicts, et cetera, which meant insurance premiums were going up. The financial markets were performing well, which was part of it. And obviously private equity was doing well. Those are our primary core businesses. Rising tides were lifting all boats. Everybody in the industry was, having really great results, and everyone was growing, everyone was profitable. M&A was kind of at an all-time clip in terms of interest in our industry, and everybody was just kind of chugging along in a positive way, not thinking about anything that was coming down the tracks.
Interesting. So how is your 2021 quarter looking like?
I'm sorry.
Performance. In terms of your performance, how is your 2021 quarter looking like, the first quarter?
This year or last year, 2020?
I think this year, and compare that with last year.
Okay, well, in 2020, I would say, I'll actually go to the end of 2019. At the end of 2019, we were roughly just under $2 billion in total sales. Our net revenues were around 150 million, and we had roughly 60 associates and about, I'd say, 15 to 16 offices. Today, we are over 4 billion in sales. We have 300 million in net revenue, and we had 1,200 plus people in 30 offices.
Excellent. So when the pandemic hit, what was your immediate and subsequent response?
Yeah, so I mean, like everybody, our immediate response was to get everybody home. I kind of talk about the pandemic in a couple phases. And so obviously, like everybody, we had to mobilize and get 600 people who were in the office on the Monday that we made the decision to close the office. And by Wednesday of that week, we had all 600 people home and online and working. And we can talk more about that. We were not really digital ready. So about half of our staff had to get issued laptops and equipment during that 3-day period of time, trying to secure the laptops, get them programmed and set up, and get everybody at home was a challenge, to say the least. And so that was kind of our immediate response. The second response was to get everybody back up, try to get business back to normal as quickly as we can, so that we could continue to service our clients, continue to meet their needs and demands, and continue to provide our services to them. The third phase was kind of try to return business as close to normal as we could, and start doing all the functions, not just the client service function, but all the functions that we would do as a company. And then the fourth phase is when we kind of shifted and said, we need to take advantage is the wrong word, but we need to take advantage of the opportunity that we have, that we're not traveling, that we're not doing these things, to kind of strategically think about who we are, pivot where we need to pivot, change directions, really think about it, and see if we can come out of the pandemic with momentum, as opposed to what, I think a lot of people try to do is first, survive and then curl up in a ball and wait for the storm to pass. We wanted to figure out how do we really take what's going on in the world and figure out how we emerge a better company, both internally and externally.
Excellent. So did your communication style or process change to address the needs of your workforce, given that now they are no longer face-to-face? You can't just go walk next door and ask Jim about how things are moving, or even actually observe them yourself, but your workforce was now spread out. How did that change your communication style and really the processes that you already had in place?
Yeah, I think communication is one of those challenging things. No matter how well you're doing it, you can always do it better, right? I mean, and that's true in good times and in bad times. But obviously, when you shift from kind of everything going well and everything is moving along to all of a sudden a crisis mode, the need and the frequency for communication goes up significantly. And so the amount of communication and the frequency of the communication and the media or the medium needed to change significantly during that time period. So traditionally, obviously we communicated word of mouth. We used a lot of email and other types of things. We pretty quickly converted to video updates for the staff. A lot of it was reassuring them about what was going on, that we had a plan, that we were moving it, that all their jobs were safe, that we weren't going to be cutting positions and doing those things. But at the same time, we communicated the decisions that we were making. We did cut the executive team's compensation. We did make a number of cost-cutting things. If you remember back to that period, most of us didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Not only the next week, but 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks down the road. And most of the predictions were, when you shut an economy completely down, you think that your revenue is going to completely fall through the floor. Your clients are going to retreat. You're going to lose business. You're not going to be able to sell new business, et cetera. So, obviously, like everybody, we had to start doing worst case forecasts and budgeting, and then just communicating that, being authentic, open, and honest and transparent with all of our associates.
So as you look back now, obviously the pandemic is not yet over, but at least now you've seen the pattern and you've settled in a particular process, or you know how you do your business, and you now have got that perception, or you have that idea in terms of what you should be doing, because you've gone past the worst, so to speak. So if you look back, what did you do right and what did you do wrong?
Like everybody, if we're honest, we did a lot of things wrong because information was changing every day. But what I would say is the big things that we got wrong, we were not ready for the digital transformation that was going to occur. I just talked about that, the fact that we had to issue laptops and get people up to speed. We should have been more prepared from that standpoint and really have thought that through in our crisis management plans. I'll come back to that. Because I also think, it's probably true in most things in life. The things we got wrong are also the things we got right. But I would say that, that was something that seriously needed to be challenged. And I always tell people, if we had to form a committee and said, how would we transition to total remote working, et cetera, we probably would have put pre-pandemic, we would put a committee together who would have met for months and months and would have come back and said it would take years and years for us to do that. But when you're faced with it, guess what? We did it in 3 days. And so one of the things I think we did right is we had the crisis management plans in place, not necessarily for a pandemic. We had the crisis management plans for what happens if a building burns down or gets hit by a tornado or has something and we're out of our physical location and we have to move people into remote working environments. And so we were able to implement that plan very quickly. And the technology piece ended up being a part of that, even though we didn't have all the technology. And I would say that was one of our shortcomings. It also turned into one of our positives because of the crisis management plans that we had placed. I would say that our communication systems and processes were not up to par. We were using kind of the traditional things that had worked and we hadn't gotten creative and thought about it. And, I'd say post-pandemic, the way we're going to communicate with our staff is completely different than we would have if we just picked right back up with where we were in March of 2020. And then I would say, what I really think we got right was our cadence, our tone, our culture. It's hard to do that stuff remotely, but it's really important that you communicate to people that you're still the same company, whether you're all physically working together or you're not. It's hard to do, but that is something that's really important, for us to continue to do. And then I think we continue to deliver to our clients at a very high level.
Wonderful. Now, I would like to explore a little bit more about the plans that you had in place. You talked about the fact that you had a team that was a disaster team prepared for any kind of eventuality. And if you look back, what are the major milestones or decisions that you think set your company up for success?
Yeah, well, I talked about the phases. I think, and I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but it's just human nature, right? I think almost every company did the first 3 phases, right? They got everybody home safely working. They got the business up and running, so they were taking care of their customers. If they were in a business that could do that, obviously restaurants and some businesses couldn't. And then we tried to get operations back to normal. But I think the thing that really set us up for success is when we actually talked to our people about, we're going to take this advantage of this opportunity that none of us asked for, but we now have in front of us to really focus on strategic things, really ask ourselves the tough questions and really strategically see if we need to shift the direction of where we're going and what we need to do. And so that is where we put our energy. And I would say that's where the momentum shifted from kind of a survival mode into a much more faster pace and a more accelerated development of our company.
Very good. Tell me a little about your recapitalization. What made it different and what made it successful?
Yeah, so when I talk about our strategic shift, the big thing, we were already in the middle of our strategic planning process. And we had just not finished. We were wrapping up our previous strategic plan, which we called Vision 2020, which was a pretty aggressive plan to triple the company by the end of the year 2020. And it had a number, there were 6 focus areas, 24 objectives, 100 plus goals that we had put in place as a company to make sure that was going to happen. But it was really a lot about building this foundation base upon which we were going to build the company and move the company forward. So we were already in the middle of the strategic planning process. And so what we needed to do was kind of finalize that strategic planning process. And so that one ended up being about four things. It ended up being about a client first mentality. It ended up being about growth, both organic internal sales and marketing, but also how do we do mergers and acquisitions, or what we can now call partnerships at a higher level? How do we tech enable the company? And how do we have our common culture? When the pandemic hit, one of the things we realized is that our capital structure was not really set up to withstand a pandemic. And the reason was we basically used all of our profit margins to do all the things we needed to do as a company. Not that different than most companies, but we sat there and said, our capital structure, we have to attract and retain the talent that we need in our company. We have to invest in new technologies. We have to invest in new initiatives that we've got going on. If we are going to do acquisitions, we have to use that profit margin to be able to fund acquisitions. We could put some debt in place if we needed to. And then because we're an independent employee-owned firm, we needed to use that profitability to perpetuate the ownership from one generation to the next. We quickly realized that our capital stack was very ineffective in trying to do what we're going to do. And if we did have a drop in stock price from 2019 to 2020, we could create, for lack of a better term, a run on the bank. We could have employee shareholders who have a higher share value at the end of 2019 than they have in 2020. But if they actually leave the company during 2020, they get the 2019 price. That's the way our capital structure was set up. And so when the pandemic hit, it was kind of one of those, oh my God moments where you're sitting there saying, if things really drop off the cliff, we could have mass exit from our company just from a survival standpoint, right? From our employees. And they would all put their shares back to us, and we would have to buy them at a 2019 price. And if too many of them did it, we wouldn't have enough capital, and then the snowball would go, and that would be the end of the company. So we decided to shift that and see if in the middle of a pandemic, we could redo our capital structure. And I apologize for the length of the answer, but I think you kind of got to have that background to kind of understand, my wife always says, there was that one night where you came out of your office and you looked like you'd been shot. And that was the night I realized that our capital structure, which was the strength of building our company, could actually be the downfall of it, because the strength of building our company was that all of our employees owned shares and that we were an employee-owned company, but it could also be the thing that brought us down. And so, what we quickly started to talk about was we needed a more efficient capital stack. We needed to use our profit to invest in people, both in terms of attracting and retaining talent, in investing in technology, and in investing in new ideas. We needed to create a debt facility, a formalized debt facility, which would allow us to acquire EBITDA or other profit margins. But we were trying to do that at a time when nobody was lending money to anybody. And I'm talking about early in the pandemic, not late in the pandemic. And then we needed a more efficient way to perpetuate our firm internally. And to make a very long story short, because we could probably take this whole time and talk about what we did, one of our board members suggested that, if you really wanted to do this, you should go have cups of coffee. At that time, there were virtual cups of coffee. But the good thing about virtual cups of coffee, you could have a lot in a day, right? You could have a lot of 30-minute sessions from one meeting to the next. But I went and met with investment bankers. I went and met with private equity companies. I went and met with sovereign wealth funds, family offices, traditional bank, public companies. And at the end of it, we really sat down and did a pro and con on each of those structures. And for lack of, again, more clarity, none of them resonated with us. There were pros to all of them. There were cons to all of them, including our own structure. But what we decided to do, this is now actually answering your question, which, hopefully will make more sense now, is what we decided to do was take the best pieces of each of those and try to eliminate as many of the cons of each of those and do it in a way that was unique and authentic to who we are as an employee And the idea we came up with was to create a private marketplace, which has all the benefits of a public company, and use multiple investors in it so that we had private equity money coupled with sovereign wealth funds, coupled with family offices that all had different time horizons so that we weren't going from event to event, and create a capital structure where the employees owned 80% of the equity in the company and the outside investors owned 20%. And what that allowed us to do is lift our market valuation from a going concern valuation to a marketplace valuation. And that was enough to cover the gap that would have created the run on the bank from the employees. In fact, the stock went up, almost doubled in its value during a time when traditionally it should have dropped the other direction. So there's a lot there to unpack, but that's what created the capital structure.
Wonderful. Recently, I read about your company acquiring or merging with a company from California. What motivated that merger, and how do you see the benefit or the synergy being harnessed from that merger?
Yeah, so people ask me all the time, when you look at kind of what's going on in our company and the rapid growth, how did you guys make that happen in the middle of a pandemic? And the reality of it is, if I'm really honest with people, what we did is we set out to solve our own problems, right? As an independent employee-owned firm, we had these challenges. We went out to solve the problem and tried to do it in a very creative way. But when you do that, guess what? You're solving the problem of all the other companies that are like you, that have the same problem, that are independent, that are employee-owned, whether through an ESOP or direct ownership to their employees. And they were having the same problem. And so what happened is these like-minded companies started talking and saying, hey, maybe we should, join forces with you. That would solve our problem. And together we would create more synergies. We would be a bigger company. We could deliver more value-added services to our clients. And that's exactly what's happened. We've done 12 acquisitions in the last 12 months in the middle of a pandemic, when most people went pencils down and not looking at trying to do those types of acquisitions and move their company forward.
So your associates must have worked incredibly hard during such times. And how did you ensure that they had the tools to do their jobs and to maintain their own well-being?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously taking care of your people and making sure that their well-being is being cared for is really hard in a pandemic. And I don't need to tell anybody on this call, everybody experienced it differently, right? I mean, some people lived in a home where they had a home office where they could go work, and essentially, other than where they were working, wasn't that different than other places. But we had a lot of associates where that wasn't the case, where they were sitting at the kitchen table with their spouse, where their kids were running around the table and they were trying to do their work, and they were together 24/7, just like all of us were. And this became problematic. A lot of people talked about young people never wanting to come back to work and continuing to work remotely. The reality of it is, a lot of the young people, maybe some on this call, are living in apartments or houses with multiple roommates. And if they're in a working environment or even in school, if they're still studying in school, those individuals are now eating, sleeping, drinking, and working or studying in their bedroom 24/7. And this created a lot of challenges for people. And so we had to, just like anybody else, really educate our managers and our leaders to check in on our people. You talk about that at work, walk around and talk to people. It's one thing when you're all in an office environment. When everybody's remotely, you've got to consciously make time every day and say, I've got to call this person and that person. I've got to check in, and then really listen, right? It's not the casual water cooler conversation about, hey, what'd you think about the game last night? Great, and you already know the answer. How was your day? And you answer the question before you even ask it, and we do this robotic thing that we all do as humans, right? With our canned answers and our standing. we had to educate our managers to really listen and hear and really ask them how they're doing. And if they're not doing well, let's get them help. And help doesn't always mean that like they need to go talk to a counselor or whatever. It could be, let's send them a meal. Let's give them a night off from cooking. Let's do, whatever it is. Let's send them, a Netflix movie. Let's, whatever the types of things we can do. And I'm not saying we got it perfect. We got 600 people, and I'm sure there's some people who struggled more during that time than others. But I would just say, educating our managers and then more frequent conversations and really trying to listen.
Very good. How did the pandemic affect the company morale?
I actually, I think surprisingly at the beginning, morale dropped. I mean, not surprisingly. I think everyone kind of expected that. Nobody knew what to take. But I think as people got comfortable with the decisions that we were making, I think as the confidence level went up, as people got creative, we weren't alone in that, where people were doing virtual happy hours or virtual lunches, or people got really creative, right? With customers, they would, send them a Uber Eats or a Grubhub or whatever, and then have lunch with them, or people got really creative about how to do things. And as that started to happen and those stories started to get shared, guess what? Morale started to go up, and people started to say, we can do this and we can collectively do it. And it almost became a challenge for a lot of people to, how creative can I get? And what are the things I can do? And that's when our new business sales went up. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but 2020, in a year when we sold almost all remotely, was our highest new business sales in the history of our company. In an industry that's, let's be honest, on the insurance side, we sell a product that nobody wants to buy and nobody wants to use. And certainly in the middle of a pandemic, nobody really wants to talk about. And so to do that and grow that at that time is pretty remarkable. But they did it by helping our clients with their problems, right? Helping solve the issues that they were addressing, that they were having. And the same is true on money management. People were nervous about what the markets were going to do. The private equity market kind of dried up, and some of our portfolio companies were struggling. Others of them were doing okay. And so, I don't take for granted what our people and team did, and the morale picked up pretty substantially. But I will tell you, I think everybody's really jacked to come back to work next Tuesday. So we're fully opening our offices back on Tuesday of next week.
So given the fact that by people stay working remotely, you experienced a high performance, high output from your employees. Are you going to have a hybrid system, or are you going to bring back everybody to the office?
Yeah, so some of this is culturally based. So we had a lot of things in place that I think helped with the pandemic. So we already had, for instance, an unlimited PTO program. So we didn't measure paid time off. At the end of the day, our philosophy is you have a job to do at a desk. Do your job. If you can do it in 4 days, you can have a 3-day weekend. If it takes you 6 days, you can have a 1-day weekend. At the end of the day, people are the CEOs or the owners of their own careers. And that was a philosophy and mentality that we had. We already had remote working pre-pandemic, and we already had flexible work time pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, what we're doing is we're giving all of our associates 4 options in the way to come back to work, and they can pick which ones they want to do. So they can come back on a full-time basis if they want. They can come back on a full-time basis with a flex plan, which means either on a monthly or basis, they go to their manager and say, I want next Friday off and the following Wednesday and the following Thursday. And it may get approved, it may not, depending on what's going on in the process. But, as far as making sure the desks are covered, and it's not really off, it's working remotely, right? Or they could have a hybrid system where it's a standard set day, where they're in the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're out working at home Tuesday, Thursday, or the inverse or whatever, or they could go fully remote. And then what we promised our associates was we would give them at least 30 days. We ended up giving them 45-day notice before the June 1st opening. And then they all got to select what they're doing. 2% of our staff has selected fully remote. About 17 to 19%, it's still kind of developing, have selected the hybrid, which means the rest of them, 80 to 81% of them, are either coming back full-time or coming back full-time with flex. And I think what most people have learned in the pandemic is, we can make remote work successful. And so I think people are comfortable with coming back to work, but having that flexibility to work at home on Tuesday or Wednesday, as long as they get the approvals that they need to do so.
Wonderful. Since we're still dealing with the pandemic challenge, in the middle of the pandemic, our country witnessed the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent social unrest that ensued. What did you and your company do to respond?
Yeah, well, that's a really timely question, especially since today is the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And I'm sure it's been on many of our thoughts for most of the day. First of all, I'm really proud to say we already had a DEI initiative pre George Floyd. And so there were a lot of things in our company that were moving forward. With that said, I wrote a letter to our staff 1 year ago tonight, really almost as soon as the event happened. I was so moved by it. I just felt like it was something that I needed to communicate to our people and talk about it. I wrote an editorial in the Denver Post, which you guys can look up and read it if you want to. But it was really a challenge to make sure that this was not a singular event, but that this was an opportunity for change. And as I said, our DEI initiatives were already going, but anybody who says what happened a year ago today, if it didn't accelerate your DEI or cause people to move their into DEI, it certainly accelerated what we were doing. We had several of our associates who came forward and wanted to share their own personal stories, which was very powerful for our associates to hear. It's not their job to educate the rest of it, but many of them wanted to step forward and make sure that their coworkers understood what they were doing. That led to a bi-weekly focus groups that we were doing internally and employee engagement groups. And that also led to a monthly speaker series where we were bringing in outside resources to kind of talk to us about what was happening on there. I created the CEO pledge, which many of you may have heard of or not, where I challenged other CEOs to pledge to doing certain things, both inside their company as well as external. And so, the internal things were about, increased recruitment, using vendors in different ways, creating a DEI program, really listening and learning and creating those process. But a big part of it is locking arms and working together to get real systemic change in our system, because if we're really honest with ourselves, our education system has inequities in it, our healthcare system has inequities in it, and certainly our judicial system and justice system has inequities in it. And these are only going to get addressed if everybody really talks about and moves forward. I'm happy to say to this point, 400 CEOs from across the country. It started in Colorado, but now 400 CEOs have signed this pledge. Probably the largest is the CEO of Southwest Airlines, all the way down to whatever size company that you can think of has now signed this pledge. And then we're now trying to take that pledge and make sure it's implemented in all 30 of our offices and have somebody leading it in each one of our offices. And there's other stuff that we've been doing, but that's a big part of it. And no different than, I think most companies have made a big substantial change in kind of where they are on DEI.
Well, let's say now step out of the company and get to know the real Richard Cohen. Uh,
My least favorite
Cohen.
subject.
Yeah. Tell us about your background and how that has shaped your professional career.
My background. Okay.
Who is Robert?
Yeah, I'll try to do it in a Cliff Note version. So, I grew up in Kansas, in a small town in Kansas, and I was blessed in a number of ways in that, I came from middle class America. I had a decent education. I was an athlete growing up, all those things. I came from a broken home where my parents got divorced. I ended up going to the University of Texas in Austin. I was able to continue to play sports while I was there, which was meaningful to me and probably the only way I could really afford to go to school. But I got a great education at the University of Texas. When I was done there, I went to work for a large multinational public company, insurance company, Fortune 500 company by the name of Chubb Insurance in Dallas. I started as a marine underwriter. They moved me to New York City as a junior underwriter on the senior team doing international reverse flow business. They moved me to Denver, where I ran the energy practice for them. I then left there. A friend of mine had called me and talked about a training program and a job placement deal that was occurring at Lloyd's in London. And so we both applied. They were taking 14 North Americans and taking them into the London market. You probably know how the story is going to go. I got in, he didn't. Next thing I knew, all my stuff was in storage, and I moved off to London and lived there for about 13, 14 months. They moved me to Sydney, Australia, where I worked for Bain Lambert, a subsidiary of Lowndes Lambert. And then at the end of that, I decided that I was going to go home to Kansas and go into business with my dad. I don't need to run you through the next 14 months of my life, but all I have to say is you take the Kansas farm boy and you move him to Austin, New York City, Denver, London, Sydney, he goes back to Kansas. It's not exactly the same anymore. And so, I told my dad I loved him, but it wasn't working for me personally or professionally. My dad was in the insurance business. I thought I was going to get out of the business. Make a long story short, I decided to come to Denver, start my own thing. After 3 years, my dad called me up and said, "You're being pretty successful about this. How about we come up with a plan for you to buy me out?" I said, "Dad, we already tried it. It didn't work. Let's not go there." 17 months later, on Christmas Eve, he wore me down. And so we bought his organization, merged it into ours, and the rest is kind of history. And so I tell people I'm blessed. I got to do an entrepreneurial startup and a family office all in one company, but lived 500 miles from my dad. So it worked out pretty good.
Wonderful. We have students in attendance. Can you define what leadership is and what you would advise students seeking careers in the financial services?
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't hear the first part.
Oh, the first part is defining leadership. Often, almost all of us, we tend to wonder what leadership really means. If you could define that in your own words, and what you would advise the students that are in the audience right now on how they can go about, what you advise them in terms of financial services careers.
Yeah.
For those who want to get a job from your company, what would you advise them as the best training?
My advice for people is the same, whether it's coming to work for our company or anything. First of all, find something that you're passionate about, that you care about. Because obviously if you have a passion for something and you care about it, then it will make a difference. People always ask me, "Rob, do you really have a passion for insurance?" I don't necessarily have a passion for insurance, but I do have a passion for working with people, solving problems, taking care of clients, meeting people, getting energy from other people, et cetera, and then using that creativity and innovation and to do that. So when I talk about passion, it doesn't mean like if you love sports, you have to go get into sports marketing, or if you love, whatever, that you have to get into that. But I'm just saying, find something that plays to your the passions that you have in your life. My second thing is, I believe all of us have, well, I'll go back, since I was a young boy, and I'm sure most of us have heard, right? We have strengths and weaknesses. And what you always hear is, play to your strength, but strengthen your weaknesses. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've been working on my weaknesses my whole life, and they're still my weaknesses. And I put a lot of time and energy in trying to turn my weaknesses into strengths. What I tell people is, your weaknesses are going to be there, and you can shore those up with other people who have complementary skill sets and talents. But really the key is to figure out within your strengths, what are your towering strengths and what are your core competencies? Because if you study human behavior, most of us spend 80% of our time in our core competencies, and we only spend 20% of our time in our towering strengths. And if you're able as an individual to flip that statistic and spend 80% of your time in your towering strength and 20% of your time in your core competencies, you'll be more successful, you'll be happier, you'll be all of those things. And so I tell people to really understand what their towering strengths are, and then play to that. And make that happen. And last but not least, be authentically who you are. No matter what organization you go to, no matter what group you go to, there's always peer pressure, right? To fit in, to do the norm, to be like everybody else. And that's okay if there's alignment. But if there's not alignment, be authentic to who you are. And I in my life, what I've seen is people who are working in areas they're passionate, who are playing to their towering strengths, who are authentically who they are, have more success and feel more fulfilled, and have better careers. And so that would be my advice, regardless of what field you want to go to. And if you want to come in our business, we'd love to talk to you, but hopefully if it meets those three things.
Wonderful. Well, Robert, thank you very much. We would now go to the audience for questions. And the first question comes from John Aronson. He wants to know how many associates contracted COVID and how many died?
Yeah, it's a great question. I should know the statistic on how many contracted COVID. I don't know that statistic, but more than I would like. Luckily, not that many that we know of got it from the work environment. Most of them got it from other environments, myself included. I had COVID, and mine was not the mild flu that most people had. I was down for the count for 6 weeks, and it was the sickest I've ever been in my entire life. We had one associate die, 39-year-old male. He and his wife, she was 36, he was 39. They both got COVID. He had 3 kids under 11. And they both went in the hospital on the 8th day, and he died on the 11th day. And it was brutal. It was really emotionally, mentally, I think, for all of us. To lose anybody that you know and care about is hard. But to lose a 39-year-old with kids and has their whole life in front of them, that had no underlying health conditions, none of the things you would think of, healthy, normal 39-year-old, was just a little hard for, and it was, I wouldn't say real early in the pandemic, but it was early enough where most of the stories have been elderly with underlying health conditions. And so I think that rocked a lot of our world. I feel blessed to be able to say, out of the other 600, now 1,200 associates, no other deaths directly. We had quite a few parents or relatives or friends of associates die during COVID. But when you have a strong culture and a family-like environment at a company, people seem to be there for each other at their worst moments, right? And if you think about the business we're in, I already said we sell a product nobody wants to buy and nobody wants to use, but we're also, by our nature of our business, we're there for people at their worst moments. We're there for people when they have a health crisis in their life. they have a property damage or something that happens, they're in a lawsuit, et cetera. And so I think that mentality helped us pull together as a family and help our associates get through whatever they were dealing with at the time.
Very good. The other question comes from Fong Bang. And a little while ago, just before we went into question time, you had talked about, well, turning your weaknesses into strengths, and you've been working on that for the past many decades, and it hasn't improved at all. And you mentioned the ratio of 80% to 20%. And Phil Bauer would like to know, can you elaborate a little more on that? What
Elaborate on the 80% to 20%?
Yes, he says 20%, 80% and 20% towards what?
Yeah. So here's the best way I can tell you. It's not like I dreamed that up overnight. One year I decided, hey, I need to set my goals for next year. And the best way I know how to do that is to walk around and talk to the people that I work with and ask them what they think my 5 goals should be for next year. And I did that with peers. I did that with subordinates. I did that with people that were farther removed within the company from what I was doing in a daily basis. But what I was really struck by the end of those discussions is, everybody said them in their own ways and did them in their own ways. But when I started looking at them, they were telling me that there were 5 things that I should do. And they were all saying them in similar ways. And then when I compared it to what it was where I was spending my time and what I was spending my time doing, I was spending 80% of my time doing other things that I was competent at, but were not these things. And when I started thinking about it, those things were my towering strengths. And when I did those things, I was happier, I was more fulfilled, and I was more successful. And they intuitively knew that. And they wanted me to go spend my time doing that because they knew, as an employee-owned firm, it's just like in sports, right? If it doesn't matter what, you can pick any sport, and I hate to use sport analogies, even though I love sports, but since the NBA playoffs are going on now, I'll use that as the background. But if you're on a team, one night LeBron James may have the hot hand. He may be hitting all the baskets, and everybody comes down the court and they feed it to LeBron, and he shoots and shoots and shoots. The next night, he might not be scoring as well, and Anthony Davis is. And so they move the ball to him. And so that's an example of towering strengths versus core competencies, right? And it changes on a day-to-day basis. But my team was basically saying the things they wanted to feed me the ball to do. And that's what they wanted me to do. And so I had to adjust the way that I did that. And then the more I started thinking about it, I thought, if I'm doing that, I bet everybody else is doing that same thing. And so if one person's towering strength is getting a rebound, another person is passing, another person is shooting, let them play to their towering strengths. And when you do that, you have a team, right? And so if we're going to create a team, what we need to do is really talk to people about their towering strengths and then partner them with people who have the opposite core competencies and towering strengths. And if you do that, everybody will be more successful. The team will win more and be more successful. Now, it's easier said than done. It's hard. It's like any self-analysis, self-performance thing is hard to do, right? But if you place a value on it, then you'll put the energy and effort in to making it happen. And so when I talk about it, that's the things. And what my team told me is, Rob, you're good at the strategic visioning piece, figuring out where we're at, where we're going to go, and breaking it down to bite-sized chunks and how we're doing it. You're great out in the community doing that piece. I was doing sales and doing that at that time, and so these were very specific skills that I had that I could contribute to the team.
Wonderful. Audrey Williams says, is Robert interested in expanding his company to Africa?
To where?
To Africa.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Africa, that's one of the other continents outside of Australia, America.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I hear you now. Sorry. Sure. You know, I mean, right now we're primarily a domestic North American company. Most of our offices are here. With that said, we have a global platform. We work with other independent firms around the world to service our international clients. We created our own international networks to do that. But as the company grows and expands, yes, I think that international geographical expansion is something that we'll do. Obviously, Australia is a place that I live, so and feel very fondly of that country. But there are others, you know, I mean, it's for us, it's more about the opportunity and less about the dots on the map. And, you know, it's really finding people that have alignment of values and vision and what they want to do.
And here is a question from Bob Spagnola. And Bob says, could you ask Robert about his leadership style and how it might have evolved over time?
You should ask my people. You know, my leadership style, that's an interesting question. I don't spend a ton of time. It's back to that authenticity piece. I think what my people would say is, you know, I'm very real with them. I don't play a lot of games. And there's nothing I wouldn't do for any of my people on any given day. And I mean that sincerely. If they had a flat tire in the middle of I-25 in a snowstorm and they called me at midnight, I would get in my car and go help them. I wouldn't call AAA, I'd go out there myself. That's probably my Kansas upbringing that I have. And then I think the important thing about leadership style is telling people where you're coming from. So I tell people in our company openly and honestly that there are 4 types of decisions that will be made in our company. There's, I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm not asking for your opinion or your thought. That's 1. 2, I want your opinion and your thought, but I'm going to make the decision. That's the second one. The third one is we're going to sit in this room and talk about it. We're going to come to consensus on what we all think we should do. And the fourth one is I'm going to tell you what I think and what my thoughts are, and you decide. And as long as everybody knows the decision that we're doing, which one of those we're doing it from, then there's complete clarity. And as long as 95 to 99% of the decisions we make in the company are the last 2, they're either consensus or they're me telling them what I think and they have the freedom to make the decision, then the 1 or 2 times over a 30-year career or in a period of time where I make a decision and I do it, then there's enough trust and respect and confidence built up that people go, wow, Rob doesn't really do that on a daily basis. And so he must have a reason. And I'm not going to ask for it now. I'm just going to do it. And I'm real clear. I come into the meeting and say, look, I've already made the decision. I'm not asking for input. This is what we're going to do. The pandemic is one of those where I used that one once, and I used I want your input, and then I'm going to decide once, because guess what? We just didn't have time to sit in a room and debate and make decisions. We had to make certain decisions right away. And they needed to trust me to do that. And then the rest of the decisions, everything else we do will go back to the consensus and them making the decision as opposed to me. And so I think leadership style is a lot about being direct and being honest and being transparent and being authentic and being who you are. And if you do that, I think it works. I think the problem gets leaders get in trouble when they try to be something they're not, and they try to deceive or lie or manipulate their people into a decision. Guess what? We can all see through that, right? We can all see through when the manager comes in and says, I really want your opinion. And this is going to be a consensus when what he or she is really saying is, I want your opinion, but I'm going to decide. And it doesn't feel good when you're on the other end of that.
And we have a hand up from Dr. Brazo. Could you ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Luca. Robert, thank you so much for sharing, and congratulations on going from 2 to 4 billion for your 12 acquisitions and for your 2020 highest sales year. So wonderful stuff. So you mentioned you were forced to go into the digital world of getting all your associates computers, and with artificial intelligence coming into play and this whole conversation around the future of work, how are you upskilling your associates from what they were doing prior to the pandemic to what they need to be doing moving forward to continue the growth?
Yeah. So thank you for the question, first of all, and thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. But it was a team effort. I didn't do it alone, I can assure you. So first of all, just to maybe clarify a misconception. First of all, I would say we were very technologically advanced in what we were doing. We just had a lot of desktops, dual screens, 3 screens, etc. We were doing a lot of cutting edge. We just didn't have people in a mobile digital platform. That was the mistake that we had. Our work was centered around people coming in and sitting around their desk. And so the beauty now is we've transitioned every single associate to a laptop. And guess what? It now works in any environment. It now works in your bedroom. It now works in your office at home at the kitchen table. It works in a hotel room when you're traveling, and you can come and plug it into a docking station, and it works with multiple screens wherever your primary work situation is. So our commitment to our employees is, first of all, regardless of what option you pick, whether you're in the office full-time, you're fully remote, or you're on the flex or hybrid system, we will provide you with one full workstation and a laptop that gives you the flexibility wherever your primary workplace is, have that multiple screen environment and things, and where you're not, you'll have the ability to work remotely. Some people, myself included, have chosen to have 2 primary workstations. If they have a second one, then they invest in that on their own, which, guess what, display, aren't that expensive, and doing those things, but it's a lifestyle choice. With that said, we have the third initiative I talked about in our strategic plan is kind of our technology initiatives. And for us, those are kind of around 2 initiatives. One is data. How do we create more data insights for ourselves, for our clients, for our vendors? And then how do we supplement that data with third-party data to create even greater insights and greater examples of ways that we can use data? Without boring you too much about our industry, if you think about insurance, the most fundamental basic insurance is our cars, right? We're still underwriting, or most of the industry, when you call up to buy insurance, they're still asking you, do you park your car inside or out? What's your motor vehicle record? Have you had any losses? How far do you drive to and from work? And those are all great risk predictors in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. When computers were put into cars, guess what? There's a computer in your car that has all the data I need to assess the risk that your car is running on. It tells me your acceleration rates. It tells me how far you drive to and from. It tells me your braking distance. It tells me whether you're speeding in certain speed zones, et cetera. And so just like Uber has dynamic pricing around when crowds come out of a sporting event or a concert or a theater, we can now use real-time data to assess risk in terms of automobiles. If it's snowing or raining out, or it's a snowstorm, then guess what? The rates should be higher than they are to do it. We're also still pricing a product on an annualized basis as opposed to a per mile basis based on these conditions. And so we can use that data, and both internal and external, to create even a more efficient and effective market profile for each and every one of you that is tailored to you, that will save you money if you're a safe driver, and cost you more if you're not. But guess what? That's the way the system should work, right? And hopefully what we'll also do is change behavior. And because if you don't want your insurance to cost so much, maybe you won't have such a heavy flight. And that will lower the risk for everybody. The second piece of it is creating efficiencies. in the system. And that's kind of at the root of your question. And that's using everything from robotics to artificial intelligence to creating data lakes and data warehouses and pulling that data in a more effective way. It's all the basic things. It's using API technology to transfer data as opposed to email and Excel files and all that stuff. And we have a whole group that's working on those kinds of technologies and things to create those efficiencies for our people and for our clients every day.
Wonderful. And the last question comes from Maggie Fouquet, and she wants to know, and she praises you highly for having established the CEO pledge, but she wants to know, how can anybody get involved in Colorado, the US, and beyond? Is this just something done by invitation, or it's open to everybody?
Yeah, so the CEO pledge is you can find it on the Be Civic website. So even though it was something that I started personally and got other people involved, I wanted to make sure that it was a community-wide effort and not something that was owned by us exclusively, because as I already said, it's something we all have to lean in and do together. So if you go to the Be Civic website and then you put in the search CEO pledge, you'll get the link. You can go in there, you can learn about that. There's also lots of things that people can do individually. So there's the Colorado Inclusive Economy. You can go to that website, and Adaptive Insights, and they're doing stuff both at an individual, group, and corporate level with people to try to create a more inclusive economy and do those things. And so both of those places are places you can lean in. And it's the same thing I said earlier, just find something you're passionate about and lean in, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the Me Too movement or any of the things that are going on. There's plenty of resources out there for places that people can lean into and make a difference. I think the biggest mistake we all think, right, is that we can't make a difference. And I love the Margaret Mead quote that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that it ever has." And we can all make a difference, but it requires us to act and not to just sit and do nothing. And if you go read my editorial, that's basically what my challenge was to people, was go act. Because if you think this is happening by accident, it's not. It's happening because we let it happen. And I know people get mad when I say this, but I mean it sincerely. We, the majority, let it happen. And if we're not looking at ourselves in the mirror and really assessing, how did that happen? Because being silent is an action, and not an acceptable one by my standards for me.
Well, thank you very much for this insightful evening, and I would like to thank everybody for coming, and also extend my thanks to our supporting partners, the International Business Circle, the Posner Center, the World Trade Center, and the other supporting partners that I may have forgotten. I'm sure I've forgotten some, and I'm going to hear from them. But thank you all, and even more important, thank you, Robert, for taking your time from your busy schedule to spend this evening with me. I'm sure you would rather be doing something else than talking to me. So thank you
for having me.
I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.